All right. So for people who are still disappointed that I'm not Jen and Jen isn't Dan, I got bad news for you. Neither of us is in fact Jen Rubin. But Dan Co, you're back. And I want to, of course, as always, remind people that they can find you at the People's Cabinet. I'm over at Pablo Torre Finds Out, www.pablo.show. And there is a bunch of stuff here in the intersection between sports and also specifically your background, Dan, our background. We now get to say, as a matter of news urgency, that we went to Harvard.
It's always,
And
it's always cringeworthy when people are trying to remind people of where they went to school through this. So I'm just going to stay silent.
yeah, look, there's a sign on my show where they literally will animate days since Pablo has said or acknowledged that he went to Harvard, and it flips back to zero quite often. This story, though, as we go into the world of college, and we'll touch some sports, but just on Harvard specifically, because we now have, I think, a view on this. At least I shouldn't presume your view. I have a view on Donald Trump's war against Harvard University, and it is not coming from a fainting couch, for me at least, in which I'm collapsed and I'm saying, how dare you? How dare you do this? It's actually something more fascinating to me that I was reminded of when Trump was giving all these graduation speeches. Because I just want to lead off with this thought, Dan. We were classmates, graduated in '07 from Harvard College. I believe that if Harvard University were to say, we would like to invite as our class day speaker next year Donald Trump, he would be there a year ago. He would go so immediately. He is just waiting to be loved on by this brand that he clearly knows and respects because he fetishizes the Ivy League as much as he is the most I'm scare quotes across all this, the most populous president of our lifetime. He adores what Harvard is, and Harvard saying no to him in a way that I'd like you to recap for us, I think is really, as always, what this is about, but he's dying to feel included again.
100%. I mean, I think that's just evident by if the pretext is anti-Semitism. Look, a lot of universities have a lot of work to do when it comes to combating anti-Semitism.
Yes.
But the notion that he is singling out Harvard as the only one, or among Columbia and others, one of the few, is just a clear sign that this is just picking battles where he thinks he can make examples, and that is beside the point, and candidly a disgrace to the pretext in which that he is trying to espouse. I had Larry Summers on my podcast, former Harvard University president, who has done a lot of work on combating anti-Semitism at Harvard. And he told me that this is incredibly counterproductive to the notion of reducing anti-Semitism on campus. This is his words, not mine. And that, frankly, he was just incredibly frustrated by the notion that the president would use this pretext when there's clearly so much more going on. And so I think that's what's really, and he continues to use anti-Semitism as that pretext. As recently as a couple days ago, it is just an insult to people like Larry Summers, who says he's been doing so much work on this for so long that people are much more likely to brush it off as just words of an extremist, when in reality, anti-Semitism, not just on college campuses, but across the country, is a huge issue that needs to be seriously addressed with thoughtful solutions, not the way that this president is espousing.
Yeah. I also want to point out that the sort of attack on Harvard goes even further back, as much as this is the pretense now, as you pointed out. It goes to this whole idea that Linda McMahon wrote about in that ridiculous letter that she sent to Harvard, in which she was saying, basically calling Harvard anti-American and even worse, anti-capitalist. There was a line in that letter in which the Secretary of Education, former wrestling promoter Linda McMahon, who you may know from the world of fake sports, where she's saying, the capitalist system you criticize, telling Harvard. And Dan, I just want to just sort of level set for people what Harvard is and isn't, because Harvard is often, yes, a laboratory for progressivism, certainly, but in the main, the most popular course at Harvard. Do you remember the most popular course at Harvard, Dan?
Act 10, Marty Feldstein.
Act 10, Marty Feld. So look, the idea of
economic guy. Yep.
his chief economist, right? We're talking about at best neoliberals, but generally we're talking about the lions of conservative economic policy, teaching thousands of Harvard undergrads who sign up thirsting for it the lessons that Ronald Reagan had to teach America about capitalism. I'm like, I took that class. It's 2 semesters. It's a year-long thing, freshman year. That was my experience. More than that, Every year they do the survey, the outgoing and the exit polling, right? Like, where are you guys going now that you're leaving these gates? And now lately, tech has entered the medal stand, right? Top three, but it's always consulting and finance.
Yep. Yep.
I presume that's your anecdotal experience, but that's also the data is that we are actually sending people, including the international students that he seeks to just use as this tool that he doesn't really care one way or the other about. That pipeline of talent feeding the capitalism he seeks to be a champion of is why this is extra stupid and hypocritical, obviously.
Yeah, the notion that Harvard just generates a bunch of far left people who hate Republicans. I mean, I think Ben Shapiro or Ted Cruz or the countless other
Henry
Harvard,
Kissinger.
Henry Kissinger. I think there's a lot of Democrats who would disagree with that assertion. I'd also say, look, this has changed a little bit in the demographics of people who voted for Trump, but younger people tend to be more liberal. It's just a fact, right? Which is why college campuses by and large, tend to be more liberal places. That does not mean that there's some kind of, machine that's happening that needs to be destroyed. And again, if that's what Trump's mentality is, fine, then go after the entire university college system nationwide. The notion that he's singling Harvard out just seems to me to be very thinly veiled other ambitions and other thought processes behind this that he's using anti-Semitism clearly as some kind of foil for, which is sickening.
Yeah, it's pseudo populism. It's pseudo empathy for Jewish students who are right to be concerned in the way that Palestinian students also right to be concerned. Look, the idea of content moderation across the internet, across college campuses, impossible, almost impossible to solve. The Supreme Court struggles with it. Mark Zuckerberg struggles with it. The college that Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of struggles with it. There is no easy answer, but what you are doing is compromising the very basic premise of academic freedom in the most obvious ways, as if that needed to be said at this point, Dan. Like, oh, right, the party that is the wing of the party that says we are here for academic freedom and freedom of speech, they are just so obviously shitting all over it that it's just like I don't collapse onto a fainting couch. I am just sort of in awe of the way in which, of course, he's doing this in this way. I want to get along those lines, though, those thematic lines, to an article in the Washington Post, because your background in the Department of Intergovernmental Affairs, am I saying the perfect term correctly?
That's correct. Wow, it's pretty
Well,
insider of you,
I
Pablo.
mean, that's why they come to that's why they come to me. It's for the insider knowledge. And you, of course, being an employee of the Biden White House, I just want to read you the headline of this Washington Post story because it reads, quote, "Within Pete Hegseth's divided inner circle, a quote unquote Cold War endures." Subhead: At the Pentagon, personality conflicts persist and inexperience reigns, fueling internal speculation about the defense secretary's long-term viability in Trump's cabinet. So, big picture, I'm sure people are familiar with Pete Hegseth's oeuvre at this point, but the specifics around just these feuds, these real housewives of the Department of Intergovernmental Affairs sorts of dynamics. How extreme is this, Dan?
So look, I think it's important to lay the subtext here because it seems like a lot of name calling and finger pointing and typical admin stuff, but just a minute to make people maybe better
Please.
understand what's happening. So before in the White House, I was chief of staff at the Department of Labor, and I came in when the new administration switched over. And so you have the secretary who's ultimately the buck stops with the secretary. But in the way the buck stops with the secretary primarily in running an agency is the chief of staff that the secretary appoints, as well as the immediate team around the chief of staff. I was chief of staff at the Department of Labor. Department of Labor is about 15,000 employees. The front office kind of leadership team is usually around 10 or 15 people. And because the secretary is constantly on the road, that team around the secretary, the chief of staff, et cetera, are the people who are day to day in the building, running the administration of the vision of the secretary and making sure things don't get messed up. That's the bottom line. That's the job. And so, look, the Department of Defense, I don't think people realize how big it is. It's literally the largest employer in the world. It employs 2.9 million people. Okay.
I didn't appreciate that,
So
admittedly.
it's just incredible. So look, there is naturally, when you have people from different factions, different experiences coming into an agency, some tension, right? Like we had people who had been Bernie Sanders supporters. We had people who were supporters of other candidates in primaries in the Department of Labor as well. But it's incumbent on the chief of staff and the people around the chief of staff, deputy, et cetera, to help administer, especially early on, the vision of the secretary, because the secretary, again, is on the road meeting with the president, et cetera. So just to put that in perspective now, the chief of staff, the deputy chief of staff have both been fired. There's an interim person there. Secretary Hegseth is not an expert. You can argue about his military record, but he is not experienced in the Pentagon, let alone experienced in leading 3 million people. Right. So it's incredibly serious that there's this leadership vacancy that I don't think people quite appreciate, that you don't really appreciate unless you really understand the dynamic
Yeah.
here. That is getting worse every day. And you can see how this infighting continues with people asking President Trump about some of these senior advisors. What do you think of them? Should they stay? And he said, well, from what you tell me, they shouldn't stay. That's a problem, right? Because as a result, there's going to be more upheaval at DOD, which at the end of the day, Pablo, just makes both of us and everyone in this country less safe at a time where we can't ignore some of the most critical global issues that are happening right now.
Yeah, the stakes of this are our collective existence. You know, as much as we worry about AI killing everybody, like this actually might have a bit of a lead, an inside track on the danger in the present tense, the clear and present danger. But I'm curious when it comes to, okay, Pete Hegseth says, again, I keep on returning to the difference between theater and actual governance. So Trump behind a podium talking about, you know, trophy wives to the military, to West Point, right? Is that where he said that one? I lose track of where he was saying all of these things at different sort of graduation speeches he would love to give. But Hegseth always talking about, you know, I feel like the word cloud of Pete Hegseth's tenure so far is war fighting. And I am not here to whatever debate what terms we should or should not use. It's clear he has a brand that he's been like hammering like Trump. Say the word over and over and over again. The difference, though, between war fighting and the governance of the Defense Department, Dan, can you just give us a sense of like why that is worrisome to not actually have someone who's focused on what seems to be, I don't know, a series of warring inner circles resulting in purges of political appointees, including his own? It's so much to process.
If the goal is to have the most lethal fighting force in the world, to have warrior mentality in the Department of Defense, then you need to set up systems within the Department of Defense to execute that vision, right? And so he can yell about that all he wants, but if he doesn't have the right people in place to execute that vision, training, et cetera, marketing meetings, communications meetings, et cetera, it doesn't matter. You know, just anecdotally, when I was at Department of Labor, you know, around 6:30 or 7 a.m., I'd have a call with Secretary Walsh, just go over the itinerary for the day. By 7:30 or 8, I'd be in the office meeting with that senior team that I just referred to, saying, okay, what divisions of the Department of Labor do we need to do to make sure that the workforce of a certain state gets the money that they need for the workforce training of that day, or to execute on some kind of plan around workers' rights? Or, you know, when COVID was happening, we were trying to figure out, you know, how we move forward with mask wearing and what the regulations are. All of that takes systems. All of that takes meetings. We meet throughout the day with the senior team. What's the latest? I need to give the secretary an update by noon. If there's nobody there, then you can't do that. And so there's not going to be a warrior mentality at DOD if there's no one there to execute that plan. So even if you take that plan for what it is and you say that it's a good thing, which, you know, you could argue a lot of stuff, not having the team in place is incredibly concerning for the American people. And it seems like there's just no, why I say this is ultimately on Secretary Hegseth is that it's on him to get his warring factions in a room and say, cut the shit, right? Like, there's too much at stake here for you all to be leaking to the press and to be grandstanding. Because at the end of the day, nobody who is staff should ever be making the news in general. If your name is in the news and you're a chief of staff at an agency, there's a reason why most people don't know who these people are, is because do your job, no one's ever heard of you, right? And so it's incredibly concerning when you see those names. It means that they're leaking to the press and the press is ginning up both sides. Again, none of this makes us more safe. None of this instills the kind of mentality that I think Secretary Hegseth wants. And it's once again a reflection on his inexperience and on candidly justifying all the concerns that people had with Hegseth in the first place.
I was going to say to go through his nomination process again, those hearings. I mean, there was, without stating the obvious, there was so much on the side of the scale that said, "Get this guy out of here. Why are we even entertaining this?" And now we're playing out the experiment, and it's going about as poorly as you might imagine, and that we haven't even mentioned Signal yet.
Exactly. And also going to be, so that's the other thing. Again, this has been litigated. I don't want to take up too much of your time on it, but the amount to which classified information in a administration is measured with care. This is Republican or Democrat. Just cannot be overstated. If you had any information that was sensitive to military action, you'd go into what's called a secure compartmentalized facility, SCIF. You would take off all of your electronics. Your phone would be checked in a little box that literally hisses. So in case someone was tapping your phone, they couldn't hear anything anyway. And it would all be reviewed in this area, all because people understood the implications of what would happen if that information came out. The fact that he did that over a Signal, and by the way, one thing that's never come out that I still ask questions about is if you look at the formatting, because we've seen now the transcript of the way it was clear that it was copy pasted from somewhere, right? And if it was on his personal phone, when you're a government employee, you do not get government emails on your personal phone, right? So if it was on his personal phone, he had to have transferred that onto his phone in some way, emailed it to his Gmail, used the camera function on his phone to copy whatever it is. It was not secure, right? And so a person with that kind of cavalier disregard, like it's some kind of script for an on-air segment, is disqualifying in my opinion, and should be further. The reason why I think it should be further litigated is because if he's done that once, he's done that many times, and it's just, once again, the judgment of that is just completely objectionable.
Yeah, look, the whole notion of we're going to get these truth tellers in there, they're going to revitalize, reform the departments. Remember, the whole point was like we're running against the federal bureaucracy. And so, Department of Defense, here is Hegseth doing what he does with his cell phone and a hammer. When it comes to the FBI, Kash Patel suddenly is, by the way, just very comically changing his tune on like, look, I think Epstein killed himself. I'm just
Yeah.
like, sure. But like the whole idea of like you get into these governmental bodies and you have to figure out, oh my God, from the inside, you need to do some stuff that is a lot like the thing that you campaigned against, right? Like
Elon Musk, same way, right?
same thing.
Pumped in saying $2 trillion we're going to cut. It turns out that most government people, especially government career employees who care about budgets and thoughtful budgets, have thought about ways to cut things. Can you cut some more things? Sure. But the notion that you would have been able to roll in there and cut 2 trillion was ignorant at best. And he gave up, right? Like this
Yes,
is
he gave up. Oh,
who claims to be like just an amazing, messianic figure who can go in any place and fix things. Well, it turns out it's really hard to fix government, and maybe, just maybe, there's a lot in that 2 trillion, like NIH funding, Head Start, Department of Defense budget, that you probably shouldn't cut that much.
right. Look, I am not here to say the bureaucracy must remain as it has always been and there can be no changes. That is not the position either of us have. The position, though, to have is maybe when it comes to the way things are now, it arrived here for both good and bad reasons. And maybe we should try to make sure that we understand how it is that the status quo became that way before we say, I have a better way of doing this, which leads me, because you've already quoted him accidentally, to Bill Belichick. So you were saying, do your job. We're thinking about defense strategy. We're talking about people not understanding the difference between theater and governance. And Dan, I don't want to spend all of the rest of the time here, the little
I
time we
do.
have left.
I do, though. Hold on. I need to hijack this
Yeah,
conversation
please
because
go
you
for
had
it.
some, I think, Pulitzer level journalism on this.
Many such cases. Yeah.
As a New Englander, Bill Belichick is always a palace intrigue question for a very long time. I know that I have seen your recent coverage on this, but I want to give you the opportunity to talk about it. There have been many things about Bill Belichick that New England and the country have been intrigued by. One of which was ring camera footage of him coming out of a house shirtless that, for some reason, everyone just thought was hysterical at the time. And by the way, it was online, but it was also on every iMessage, person to person,
Absolutely.
forever. And so you took the next step that I just don't have the mental capacity to have even conceived of doing. And I want to make sure you share it with this very politically engaged audience, because maybe some political journalists who do just politics for a living can learn from the lessons of what you did.
So this ring camera footage is as Dan described. It's Bill Belichick like a dazed bear wandering on a porch on a ring camera, topless, Zaftig, I dare say.
By the way,
Um,
like super low resolution, like
oh,
it's like a Bigfoot type sighting, you know?
absolutely Bigfoot adjacent. So, Tom Brady in his roast on Netflix Live says, when people used to ask me, what's your favorite ring? I'd always say the next one. Now, my answer is that camera that captured Coach walking out of that poor girl's home. So that was in early 2024. And so it was this big, mysterious internet artifact. What is this video? Where is it from? And no one had solved it. And so I set out to do this in my sequel to my original sort of like opus on Bill Belichick, which I can't truly summarize here because it's also insane. And as Dan puts it, sort of defies standard mental capacity, which I take as both the compliment and truly worrisome thought that it is. So what I did was I looked at the background footage of this blurry ring cam video and I sent it to I don't know if people out there know about geo-guessing, but I went onto a podcast and gave a bat signal to the sky for the world's best geo-guesser, a guy named Rainbolt. Rainbolt basically looks at Google Maps snapshots and is able to place where in the world that is within seconds. And so Rainbolt helped assemble 8 geoguessers, an Avengers roster of 8 geoguessers around the world to be sicked upon this question. And simultaneously, because I was appearing on all these radio stations in Dan's hometown of Boston, I was a guy that people knew to reach out to if they had tips. So 2 parallel paths of reporting: local, on the ground sources, geoguessing. And all of it culminated, spoiler alert, in me visiting the home, which turned out to be an Airbnb that I rented and recreated the video
Wait,
just to
you're
prove
leaving out a little bit of the
what
story.
did, what did I what did I
So
leave
did they
out?
so did one of the geoguessers just say, I got it, and then you had to like how did that step is
So a German geoguesser,
see, this is why I asked, because this is a good
a
story.
German geoguesser by the handle of M. Kantau, uh, said, I found the house. And he sent it to me. And simultaneously, the local on the ground reporter in me got the information this was an Airbnb. And so, matching that, I looked on Airbnb, found the house, or at least what I thought was the house, and confirmed it because on the list of reviews was a review for 5 stars left by Jordan Hudson, who
Oh,
is the real protagonist of this whole story. That is Bill Belichick's now 24-year-old girlfriend. At the time she was younger, she is the person running his enterprises in media and in life. And so, again, can't even begin to give you a thumbnail sketch on her, but just know that she booked it. And so did I. And we have an interview with the couple that owns it. We have the history of this artifact. We have the notion that people, I think, have underplayed, which is NFL teams saw that video and wondered, what is this? As they were contemplating whether they should hire a 70-something-year-old Bill Belichick, who then went on to become, to circle the loop here, to close it with Linda McMahon to Bill Belichick, who became the highest paid public employee in the state of North Carolina for one of our nation's finest public universities. Defensive strategist who has left gaping holes in his schematic approach as a public figure and a college administrator, effectively, which just sort of feels like, again, the politics and sports news cycles tend to sort of like be like a snake eating its own tail, wearing its own poop as a hat sometimes.
wait,
It's
wait.
just like,
I have two more things on this you left out. Well, one, and then an insight that brings it back to
sure.
politics. First, you recreated the video. You need to make sure everyone knows that because it's probably the funniest
I
part.
recreated it to prove that I was there, and of course, my journalism is impeccable. Clearly, also I wore my shirt. A big thing in the comments on YouTube was you should
People
have taken off your
disappointed.
shirt, and I'm like, guys, if I want to win another Edward R. Murrow Award, I don't know if I can take my shirt off in the parody video of Bill Belichick as a pure self-interested side note.
Fair enough. But the other lesson, and I'm stunned that this has not happened yet, but I unsuccessfully ran for Congress in 2018, where I went around and knocked a bunch of doors, and every person who runs does that. There is yet to be a cautionary tale that will inevitably emerge.
Mm.
When you ring the doorbell, you wait, and most people, candidly, when they see it's a person with a flyer, not that excited to open the door. I get it, but you pound the pavement and you hope that people listen to you, or at least just hear you out. And it's only a matter of time before a candidate says something after they ring the doorbell that gets them not elected. It's only a matter of time. And it has not happened yet. And it stuns me
That's
that it has
such a
not
good
happened.
point. I'm going to go to the next step, though. Not only will there be a candidate who doesn't get elected because of the ring cam video, there will be a candidate who stages a fake ring cam video that makes them look great,
That
that
is
does
also
get them
true.
elected.
That is also true. I try to be optimistic and not cynical about politics, Pablo, but you just went there and I'm just going to go right there with you.
I think on that note, we should probably end, having been cynical and optimistic in the same breath, politics and sports at once. Dan Co, the People's Cabinet, you should subscribe. I'm over at Pablo Torre Finds Out. Jen, it's been a pleasure filling in for you.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks to everybody for watching.
Thank you, Pablo.